So at this stage I'm doing some glazing in certain areas of the painting. I've just glazed this foot here, the female. I'm about to do the same with the male now. So this is not the final layer, but it's just a glaze that I've done to give it a little bit more shape. Now you can see the massive difference between those two sides, and I'll show you it really quickly to change things with a glaze. So this looks a little bit like a little bit messed up, but there is method in the madness. So over here I've got some phthalo blue. That's a very transparent blue, and I've got burnt sienna. So between the two of them I can mix all kinds of different colors for my glazing, and when I mix the two it does give us a bit of a greenish cast. If I put in more of the burnt sienna, it goes a little bit more brownish. If I put in more of the phthalo blue, it goes more blue. I would sometimes add a little bit of raw sienna as well. That gives me more yellowish type of color. If I want to even things out and make it a bit more grey, I would sometimes use alizarin crimson in there as well. It's just important when you glaze not to use any opaque colors. So you want to stay away from white, especially no white in there. I would rather use a phthalo blue like this instead of ultramarine blue like that, because the ultramarine blue is not going to be that transparent, except if I want to work in specific dark areas. I want to make it almost black with my glaze, then I might use something like that. I've got a bit of burnt umber there. It will also, if I use it in the glaze, would make it really dark, so I'm not going to use any of that there now. And this is just Liquin original that I'm going to use for my glaze. So the thicker I apply the glaze, the darker it's going to be, and the thinner I apply the glaze. See, when I start there, when I look at that, that's a little bit too brown for me there, because this area I want to have more blue in the shadows there, so I'm adding a bit of extra phthalo blue there for this bit. And it has such a strong, you can see that's a little bit too much, it's such a strong pigment. So what I'm going to do is just add a bit more of my burnt sienna. What's nice about the oil colors, you can always wipe it off as well if you're not happy with the way that it looks. You might not be able to wipe 100% off, but you might be able to wipe quite a lot off. So as soon as I start putting in my shadows like that, that area of the toe immediately gets pushed back into the canvas, and with this bit will stand out. So darker colors tend to recede and lighter colors tend to stand out, and then you can play around a bit with warm and cool colors. So cool colors tend to recede, warm colors tend to stand out. So my light is coming from here, so this toe over here is going to have a shadow there as well. Especially this underneath the toe. It's interesting with the light. We're working with all kinds of light. We've got direct light, and we've got all the light bouncing around, some reflected light. So I'm just gonna put a thin glaze over there just to reduce some of the chalkiness. So I'm going to do some extra layers over here later, and I'm going to add my highlights and things like that. But at this stage, sort of in the beginning stage of forming these toes and putting in detail, I don't have a lot of detail in the toes yet. These toes are going to be influenced, their color, by a lot of things. It would be the toes, the actual color of the toes, and they basically a greyish colour, and then it's reflection from anything around the toe. So we've got a lot of green leaves, so it will cause a bit of green reflection. And then very often the feet are relatively dirty, so that can influence the colour as well, and that might be something that they've sat in, or it might be something that they are actually eating. So in this area, that's a little bit of an area on the hock there, and that's going to be pushing on the branch sometimes when they sit down, and that little bit, sometimes it will have a reddish tinge. So I'm going to use a little bit of alizarin crimson in that area there, and the same with that part of the foot there. It differs a little bit between individuals. Those changes under the feet, sometimes it takes a few years. This bird is relatively young, so this will change a lot as it gets older. So I'm standing very close to the canvas here. What I will have to do, I will have to step back and just see where I'm at. So I'm going to step back a little bit, have a look from a distance. Yeah, I think we're going in the right direction. Now these toes are really complicated. So we've got the 2 toes at the front and 2 toes at the back, but that's a very short little toe and that's a long toe, and you can see this nail is sort of curling around. So when you look at it at first glance, if you don't know exactly what these parrots, what their feet looks like, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what's happening here. So with a lot of things, your eyes can just fill in all the detail that's actually not on the painting, but if you're not familiar with something, it's sometimes difficult for the viewer's eyes to fill that in. So this areas that I want a bit darker, I'm using a tiny bit more of the phthalo blue. And what that does, it does push things back a little bit for 2 reasons. One, because it's dark, and because of that cool color that I'm introducing with the phthalo blue there. And as you glaze, you always lose a little bit of contrast as well, and something in the foreground will have a lot of contrast, and something in the background will have less contrast. So people use that a lot in landscape paintings, but you can use it in any painting. Now this is a very interesting part of the foot here, because the toe, all of this isn't the toe. The toe is actually only over there. This is actually part of the hock down there. So on the reference photo, you can't really see the distinction there too clearly, but I know that is what's happening here, and I think it is going to be a bit of a challenge to paint that in such a way that the viewer is going to understand that, if they don't know the structure of the feet very well. In some viewers will. So some things would look perfect on a photo, because if we see something on a photo, we just assume, okay, that's the way it is. If we have that on a painting and it doesn't make sense to us, then we assume that there's something wrong with the painting. It's not like a photo where we assume, okay, that's the way it is. So sometimes I can't even paint something exactly like the reference photo. Even some of the clouds, they these amazing shapes. When you see them, it's like, wow, that's amazing. If I paint that, people would think, oh, you painted that cloud. Okay, a cloud can't look like that. But you can see his feet has got a lot more brownish color in there than the female. He must have been sitting in something like dirt, red dirt or something that he got on his toes. Now this one, I don't know if perhaps if I lighten that toe a little bit by wiping some of my glaze off, I might be able to let this bit of the toe stand out from that part of the leg that's actually lower down there. But in reality, you don't always see the lines that clearly. A lot of things in reality would be a bit blurred. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe a bit of that off the top as well. So instead of painting darker, I can just decide to wipe that off, and in that sense create a three-dimensional shape. Could you see when I wiped that area there, it immediately gave it shape? Just barely touching that, giving it a little bit of detail by wiping like that. So it gets to the point with a glaze where things are really, it gets slippery. It feels slippery to me anyway. And then I just leave that to dry. And then I will put in a little bit more details and things. So you can do it while it's wet as well. But in this case, I'm going to give it a little bit of time. I'm going to spend more time working on the feathers today. I think what I'll do while we are busy here, and I've got my glazes here, I'm gonna just put a bit of glazing on the beak as well. With the beaks I normally do quite a lot of layers. It gives me that special, just a bit of depth when I do that. So it's going to be a tiny bit of shadows there where the feathers are going to cast a shadow on the beak underneath. So we're going to put a bit of shadows in there. Because even in reality, when you look at the beaks, it's got so many layers. Some of the layers would be a little bit transparent. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a bit of the raw sienna here to give it quite a bit of a yellowish cast. So it's not a pure raw sienna, and when I glaze like this, depending on what I'm painting, when I glaze like this, I'm not going to use like a pure color for my glaze. It's always a bit of a mixture, just to make sure no color is going to be overpowering, except if you paint something like with a really pure color like a red rose or something, that's a different matter. But in something like a beak like this, the colors are going to be relatively mixed and subdued. Amazing beaks, these Gangan cockatoos. they are completely different if you should compare them with a sulfur crested cockatoo, for instance. I've got a funny little shape, these gangs. Okay, so I'm going to stand back again, just have a bit of a look. So some of the colors on here will be because of shadows that are cast, but some of the colors is just the way that the beak is colored, like the darker area here, that's just colored like that. It's got nothing to do with a shadow. Over here it's going to be a bit of a shadow to just give us that three-dimensional rounder shape. So at some stage I'm going to use lighter colors and just go over some of the detail again. Alright, you can see how much of a difference there is between the male and the female beak now, and they are going to be a little bit different. I see on my reference the female, the beak is not quite as yellow as the male. See, there's a lot of contrast there, so I specifically put in extra contrast because I knew I'm gonna glaze this, because when I glaze, look at all the contrast there, and as soon as I do the glaze, you reduce the contrast like that. So you sort of have to just make provision for that, and if you've done it quite a lot of times, you will sort of start planning for things like that. Alright, so this area is going to be a little bit darker here. There. Just got a darker patch over there. So when you paint like that, when you're trying to create something three-dimensional, you have to look at your reference photo and try and get it as close as you can to the reference photo. But if you know your subject well and you know what the shape of this beak actually is, it does help a lot as well, because there can be, the light can be coming from a weird direction or some kind of a reflected light on your reference. That's going to make it, if you paint it exactly like that, it might be difficult to interpret. So I just change things as need be. So at this stage over here, I'm going to add a little bit more of the raw sienna. So that's a little bit more yellow. So your beak is a bit more yellow here. Again, can you see all that contrast there? So as soon as I glaze, that contrast is going to reduce. So this area here, the feathers over here, is going to cast a shadow on the beak. So this is going to be relatively dark. And some people can paint a beak like this in one layer, and that's amazing. It's quick. I tend to do it in a few layers. To me, it just feels like it's taking the pressure off me, not trying to get everything absolutely perfect. Because a painting like this, there's a lot of time going into it, and it can become quite discouraging if you feel that you are stuck and just not getting anywhere. So I can see in this area here, I'm gonna put in some extra highlights again there later. But for now, I'm just going to smooth things out a little bit. So there's quite a dark shadow because in this little area here, it's underneath, and the shadows, the feathers are going to cast a shadow. So that's going to be a really dark little spot there. And your viewers that's going to look at your painting their eyes will be looking for shadows like that. They wouldn't even realize that they're looking for that, but if it's not there, the brain's just going to tell them there's something a little bit off in the painting. They don't know, it just doesn't look right to them. They don't know what it is. So this area over here, that seems like that's standing out quite a bit, and that's more receded there. I want this to stand out a little bit, so I'm going to wipe away a bit of my glaze there, just to see if I can. Yep, that's bringing it out a little bit. Seems like it's coming more to the front, because I don't want that to be completely indented there and standing out, because there's a lot of texture there, but it's not indented in that area. It's on almost the same level as the bottom there. I might wipe away a little bit there. So if you wipe the glaze off, you can make it lighter, but the chalkiness in your white that went away with the glaze, it's not going to come back. There's going to be a thin enough glaze on there to prevent that from happening. I think I'm going to wipe away a little bit there as well, to just give that shape, because the light's going to fall on that rounded area, and over here when it's going in like that, there's going to be less. Because the painting process is a lot about creating an illusion. You're not really painting everything that's there, but we're just giving enough, putting enough on there for the onlooker to be able to, for its brain to fill in the rest of the details. Right, so I'm going to darken the inside of that little flower pot. So this is eating some of these flower pots there, and as they eat them, they will crush them. So the shape is not going to be completely like one of these. It's going to differ a little bit. Then an interesting challenge is going to be to get this tongue just the way that it should be, because you can't put in too much detail. If you put too much detail into that tongue, the tongue is just going to be over there. It's not going to look realistic. So just sort of a suggestion of the tongue. And then I've got these soft parts on the inside of the beak standing out there, and they can appear to be quite weird when a person look at that and they don't know that they are there, because their brain is immediately going to ask them, what is that I'm seeing, and they might not know. So I don't want to make those too prominent. So the tongue, let's see, I've got a little bit of burnt sienna on there, and I'm going to put a little bit of color on the tip of the tongue. That's just going to let it stand out a little bit. And very often I would have a little bit of color there, the tip of the tongue. Don't want to put on too much, but I'm going to do a little bit of alizarin crimson there as well, but it has to be very subtle. Okay, yep. Now the female's tongue, it's a really weird position that she's got the tongue in. So what I'll do, I'm going to darken that shadow there. So you can see how strong this phthalo blue, it is such a strong pigment. So I think in this case I'm going to add a tiny touch of burnt umber. The specific burnt umber that I'm using here is also quite a strong pigment. And if I go over those previous layers there. This is probably going to appear black. But because I'm not using just a pure black, this color would appear to have a lot more it's going to be much more lively than just a black. Because your eyes and your subconscious, you're going to pick up all those subtle colors. So while she's eating this tongue is going to be quite distorted, and again it's going to be a challenge for somebody to interpret that. So I'm going to make it very subtle, just as sort of a suggestion. Something happening there, and while at it, I've got the burnt umber on there now, so I can make that a little bit darker than I would have been able to with just a burnt sienna and phthalo blue, just because the burnt umber is a darker color. And then these areas here where this is shadows cast by those little feathers, I'm going to put a bit more in there as well. Same there. Alright. So when I post these videos on YouTube, I haven't been doing it for a very long time, so I'm relatively new at this. So if you enjoy this content, give me a thumbs up, or even better, give me a comment. Then I know, yes, people like watching this, because this is not a very refined video. This is just really a video to show how working in. I'm hoping that if somebody can learn something from this, it would be great. And what I'm also hoping for, I mean, there are a lot of painters out there. I might learn something from the comments as well. And then I know some people just like to watch the painting process. Any creative process is interesting, so it might be that you're just watching this and just enjoying and finding it relaxing. But yeah, let me know if you would like more content like this. I'll see you next time.